No one noticed the elderly veteran's anxiety as he left the hospital, until the Special Forces team behind him came to protect him. Before you start, share in the comments which city you're watching this video from today. The town of Roanoke, Virginia, was a peaceful place with its forested hills and quiet streets. But on the morning of July 2025, there was an unusual silence in front of the town's local hospital. The morning chill had not yet fully dissipated. At the hospital entrance stood a gray-haired, slightly hunched man. His name was Leonard "Len" Carter. Leaning on his cane, he tried to stand straight, occasionally scanning the area. The townspeople knew him as Uncle Len, aware he was a former soldier, but no one bothered with the details. Len had been admitted to the hospital for a 3-day checkup. The doctors had said, "Everything is normal, just rest a bit." The young nurses had chatted with him cheerfully, making jokes. But one of them, a new hospital employee named Adam, had noticed the depth in Len's gaze. Len wasn't a smiling man. He was quiet, but observant. Every morning at 6:40 a.m., he would go out to the front of the hospital and watch all the approaching cars carefully. The bulge in his coat pocket looked like a book or a notebook, but Adam had noticed that it remained fixed like a silhouette. That morning, at exactly 6:42 a.m., a black-windowed SUV with civilian license plates pulled up in front of the hospital. As the engine shut off, the door opened, and 5 people stepped out. The men, wearing black helmets and fully equipped, moved silently, lining up like a military unit. Hospital staff and a few visitors froze in place. Adam was close enough to hear his heartbeat. He stepped back when he saw the team. Len didn't move. The lead soldier came directly in front of Len. "Commander Carter, the transfer is ready." Len nodded slightly, then looked around carefully. He glanced at Adam first, then at the nurses. He didn't respond. But at that moment, the atmosphere in Roanoke changed. A woman took a photo of the driver, and a child asked in astonishment, "What is Uncle Len doing?" The soldiers gently but firmly guided Len to the vehicle's door. Len dropped his cane, pulled a folded document from his pocket, and handed it to Adam. "Keep this. You'll need it one day," he said. As he got into the vehicle, he turned around and smiled slightly for the first time. As the vehicle drove away, the hospital entrance fell silent. But everyone knew, Uncle Len was more than they had imagined. Perhaps he was a commander, perhaps a forgotten hero. But the real question was, why had Len been recalled? And what was the document in his jacket pocket the key to? The next morning, a tense silence reigned in the hospital. Yesterday's scene had disrupted the town's routine. The old man walking among the soldiers had become the center of street gossip. But one person was curious about more, the young attendant Adam. Len's gaze as he left the hospital, his calm yet cautious steps, the bulge in his pocket, and the soldiers greeting him as "Commander." A lingering suspicion now gnawed at Adam's mind. And this curiosity led him to the hospital's old records. That night, after his shift ended, he delved into the dusty folders in the empty archive room. He searched the hospital's old patient lists for the name Leonard Carter. He found it. Aside from a few routine checkups in 2009, 2012, and 2021, there was nothing noteworthy. But Adam didn't stop there. He turned to the internet. He typed in Leonard Carter Iraq 2003. Among thousands of results, an encrypted note on a military blog caught his attention: Northern Iraq, March 2003. Deep infiltration. Commander, LC enemy leader captured alive. 104 soldiers evacuated to safe zone. Code name, Hammer. LC, Leonard Carter. Adam's heart raced. On other pages of the blog, the name was censored, but a single detail was given: a medal with a sword and star on the chest, awarded only for highly classified missions. Adam stopped. The faint stripe visible under Len's jacket. It was the same. The next morning, Len was sitting on a bench in the shade of the hospital garden. He wore his classic gray coat, his cane by his side. His eyes seemed fixed on a distant point. The man approached, a bit nervous but determined. His heart was pounding. "Len," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "The soldiers I saw yesterday. And that medal. Were you in Iraq?" Len turned his head, his eyes meeting the young officer's. He seemed to study Adam for a moment. Then he slowly opened his coat. On his chest was a metal-embellished ribbon, a vertical sword in the center, a shining star behind it. Below it was just a number, 2003. "Just a trace of the past," Len said, his voice dry but calm. Adam continued, "I read something on the blog. The codename was Hammer. An officer named LC saved over 100 soldiers, captured the enemy commander alive. Was that you?" After a long silence, Len gripped his cane with both hands. His eyes drifted off into the distance. "Yes," he said, his voice blending into the wind. "But those missions take a lot out of a person. That's why I stayed silent. That's why I wanted to forget." He heard Adam swallow. His heartbeat was almost audible. "But why?" he asked. "Why doesn't anyone know? Why are you keeping it a secret?" Len bowed his head. "Because what they call heroism often comes at the price of regret. The scars of those days still haunt me." At that moment, the wind in the hospital garden seemed to stop. A few nurses were watching them from a distance. No one spoke, but something had changed. Everyone could feel the storms raging inside the old man sitting silently. From that day on, Len walked with a straighter posture, but his eyes were fixed on the distant horizon. And Adam no longer saw him as just Uncle Len, but as a hero living in the shadow of the past. Adam began to look at Len differently from that day on. As he walked through the hospital corridors, he noticed the quiet discipline in Len's steps. Despite his cane, his gait was like that of a soldier, his steps had a certain rhythm, as if he were following an invisible tactical map. His eyes were always moving. He smiled at the nurses as they passed by, and the patients greeted him, but part of Len's attention was always drawn to the television hanging on the wall or the darkness outside the window. As if he were still waiting for danger. The man wanted to know who this quiet but powerful man was. One morning, he gathered his courage and went to the hospital director's office. "Director," he said, his voice firm. "I have a question about Len. His full name is Leonard Carter, isn't it?" The director looked over his glasses. "Yes," he said slowly. "I've known him for years. He comes almost every year. He's usually alone. A quiet man. But sometimes, he stands there, and you feel like a threat has entered the room." The man swallowed. "Well, have you ever heard that he has a military background? I saw a medal on him yesterday. It had a sword and star emblem. Also, armed soldiers greeted him at the hospital entrance. They called him Commander." The director suddenly sat up straight in his chair. "A medal? Are you sure?" The man nodded. The director paused for a moment, then murmured softly, "Years ago, maybe 5 years ago. It was the night shift. The fire alarm hadn't gone off, but he said we had to evacuate a room. Everyone looked at him suspiciously, but 3 minutes later, smoke started rising from the cables. No one could figure out how he knew." With this information, something sparked inside Adam. That night, he went back down to the archive room. This time, his target was clear. He tried to infiltrate deep state documents rather than open sources. VPN, old military forums, archived PDF reports, he stayed in front of the screen for hours. Finally, what he thought he had found sent a chill down his spine. A secret report from the early months of the 2003 Iraq War. Code name, Operation Hammer. The report mentioned American commandos infiltrating an enemy-controlled area near Mosul. An 11-hour operation resulted in the capture of the enemy leader alive, while dozens of casualties were expected in heavy fighting, yet 104 soldiers were evacuated safely. The critical detail, the person overseeing the operation was Lieutenant LC. The file was classified, but there was a note at the bottom: after the mission, Elsie took leave and returned to civilian life. The man held his breath. Elsie, Leonard Carter. That old man, the quiet, cane-wielding Uncle Len, was actually a war hero who had saved lives in Iraq. But why didn't anyone know about it? Why was he living alone in an old house on the outskirts of town? Why was he hiding his past? As the man wrestled with these questions, morning had arrived. Len was sitting on the bench as usual, holding a thermos of coffee. The man sat down beside him. There was a long silence. Finally, he asked, "Are you, him? Lieutenant Elsie?" Len paused for a moment, took a sip of his coffee, then nodded. "I am," he said. His voice was neither proud nor ashamed. He was just tired. "Then why are you here?" the man whispered. "Why are you alone?" Len stared into the distance. "Because not only people were saved in that mission. A part of me stayed there too. Sometimes being a hero means people want more from you. That's why I chose silence." Adam couldn't respond. His eyes filled with tears. He couldn't call Len Uncle Len anymore. He was a man who had walked out of the shadow of war but couldn't shake that shadow from within. And now, the silent scream of the past was beginning to echo through the town once more. After learning Lieutenant Leonard Carter's true identity, Adam kept it to himself for a long time. But a secret, if it's big enough, echoes even in silence. As the days passed, the hospital staff began to look at Len differently. The nurses no longer treated him like just a kind old man, but like a hero walking with his past. Young doctors began to sit by his side and ask him questions about the war. But Len would often just smile and look off into the distance, leaving the answer hanging in the air. One morning, a man entered the hospital and approached the security guard, asking, "Is Leonard Carter here?" He was wearing a worn military jacket. His eyes bore the weight of years. The man's name was Mike. He was a retired Marine. When he found Len at the hospital, he spread his arms wide and walked toward him. 2003 Mosul. "Do you remember? You saved my battalion." Len didn't say anything at first. But when he looked into Mike's eyes, he nodded. "I still see those hills every night," he said. Mike took his hand. "You became my son because of you. If I had died that day, I would have had nothing. You weren't just a commander, you were hope." This encounter spread by word of mouth. Roanoke was a small town, and such stories took root quickly. People now saluted Len as soon as they saw him on the street and gave him priority when queuing at the market. A week later, the town council decided to hold a special memorial service for Len. That day, the town square was packed. Old soldiers, young people, children, and the elderly, everyone was there. When Len stepped onto the stage, there was that familiar tense smile on his face. When the soldiers saluted, his eyes misted over for a moment. He gently placed his hand over his heart, then tapped his cane lightly on the ground. The crowd erupted into applause. But this was no ordinary ceremony applause. It was a belated outpouring of gratitude for a hero who had remained silent for years. At the end of the ceremony, the elderly museum curator approached Len. "Mr. Carter, your medal and any map you may have would be an honor for our museum," he said. Len paused for a moment, then pulled the faded medal from his pocket. Then he handed over the yellowed operation map he had brought from home. The map showed the routes of the Hammer operation. The museum curator's hands trembled. These are no longer just pieces of paper. They are a legacy. Just then, an elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd. She walked slowly toward the stage with her cane. Tears welled up in her eyes. "My son," she said. "He was in Mosul that day. You saved him. Today I have 3 grandchildren, and they exist because of your courage." Len didn't hold back his tears for the first time. He took the woman's hand. The crowd fell silent. In that moment, Roanoke wasn't just honoring a hero, it was honoring its own spirit. At the end of the day, Adam handed Len a small note. It was written in bold letters, "The town is proud of you." Len took the note and put it in his pocket. He smiled slightly. "Perhaps," he said in a low voice, "danger is still following me here." Adam couldn't say anything. He just bowed his head. From that day on, the townspeople began to call him the protected veteran. He represented not just a soldier, but someone who protected even in silence. Next to the medal displayed in the museum was this inscription: "Some heroes don't shout. They walk. And they leave behind the silent gratitude of a nation." And this story ended with a question. Have you ever met someone like Len? A hero who protects silently,